on the life and work of Steve Jobs, which, as you know, he is now deceased. And in speaking of Jobs, this author said, "He planted a seed that burst through the soil of society and introduced into our world a new variety of vegetation. He named it apple. The world called it good, and it was not just any ordinary garden variety innovation. At the time of Jobs' death, his company had earned and held more cash on hand than the United States Federal Reserve, as you may know. His vision to have a personal computer for everyone became his life's passion, and his innovation, leadership, and creativity made his name and his image synonymous with the brand. Steve Jobs was Apple, and Apple was Steve Jobs. Apple was a manifestation, this author said, of Jobs' mind and how he perceived the world, the marketplace, and computers. And Jobs knew this. As long as the company had its leader, it could stay on course. However, when the day came when the company no longer had its leader, how would the mind of Steve Jobs live on through its employees? Jobs thought he could solve this problem by hiring the dean of Yale School of Management. He gave him a large task: help Apple's leaders internalize the thoughts of its visionary founder in preparation for when the founder is no longer around. And so with this as its charter, an executive training program dubbed Apple University was founded. Its students are taught how to think and make decisions like the company's founder. Students are immersed in the core beliefs that Jobs taught as a key to Apple's creative and innovative enterprise. And they're shown how those beliefs translate into business strategies that will bear more fruit in the marketplace. This is the hope for all graduates, that Jobs abides in them, and they abide in Jobs, and that the company bears much fruit. End quote. An interesting reflection, an interesting analogy as we consider what Jesus says to us in today's gospel. Whereas Steve Jobs planted a seed that burst the soil of society, burst through it, and introduced to our world a new variety of vegetation, which he named apple. Jesus planted a seed named the gospel, which for over 2,000 years now has introduced to our world a variety of life that is life-saving and eternal. And Jesus, too, established an executive training program to help its members internalize the thoughts of its visionary founder in preparation for when he was no longer around. And the name of this training program is the church. And in it, its members are taught how to think and make decisions like its founder, Jesus, resulting in business strategies that will bear more fruit in the marketplace. This is the hope for all members, Christians, that Jesus abides in them and they abide in Jesus, and that the church bears much fruit. And so in the gospel, we hear Jesus speaking of bearing this fruit. And as lovely and as promising as the idea of bearing fruit sounds, well, we might receive Jesus' words about bearing fruit with mixed feelings, especially when he speaks of pruning. His words may even evoke anxiety or fear. You know, when we think of pruning our shrubs and the instruments which accomplish that, well, those sharp edges are not very inviting, are they? Imagine those sharp pruning edges being applied to us. The idea makes us wince. The prospect, never mind the reality itself, will cause us to scream and holler, perhaps even run away, or even take up arms to protect ourselves. We would like to know exactly what Jesus has in mind when he says, every branch that bears fruit he prunes to make bear more fruit. And even more, what does Jesus mean? What does he have in mind when he says, the Father removes every branch in Jesus that bears no fruit? How are we to understand that? If you've seen the movie or read the book, Water for Elephants, you will recall that August, the tyrannical, mean-spirited owner of the circus, which traveled by train, would sometimes have his henchmen throws certain individuals off the train at night as it sped along. And this was how August fired those whom he did not want to pay or didn't seem so important to the service. They called this throwing off the train, sometimes to deadly rocks below, redlining. Is Jesus saying that the Father will redline us, throw us off the train if we do not bear fruit? It's a very disturbing possibility. So we need to realize that what Jesus is speaking to us about this morning is not some academic exercise without practical and personal application to us. Pruning obviously conjures up the prospect of pain, and with that our desire to understand why life can be so painful. And so we're talking about suffering. In the words of C.S. Lewis, we're not necessarily doubting that God will do the best for us. We're wondering how painful the best will turn out to be. And so being a Christian does not mean we will not suffer. Jesus' words to us today in part help us to make sense of suffering and perhaps alleviate some of its sting. But you see, before we consider what Jesus means by pruning, we have to identify this fruit of which he speaks. What is it? As one observer has noted, sometimes vision gets fuzzy, and instead of living in the true vine and bearing good fruit, we get tangled up in a false vine. False vines grow like kudzu. We're all familiar with kudzu. Until they have entwined themselves through the entire soul. So how are we to know whether we're producing good fruit if we don't know what the fruit is? And certainly Jesus is not talking about us growing an apple or a pear. So is he talking about us becoming more Christ-like, more moral? Is he talking about how fruitful certain ministries are? Does bearing more fruit mean that our thrift store should double its sales? Or that membership here at St. Elizabeth should double? What is the fruit? Should the fruit we bear be something we enjoy, maybe even give us a sense of purpose? I read recently about a man who was walking along the beach when he tripped over a lamp. So he turned and kicked the lamp out of anger. Well, sure enough, a few seconds later, a genie popped out of the lamp. But the genie was angry because the man had kicked his lamp. And so reluctantly the genie said, "Even though you kicked me, I will still give you 3 wishes. However, because of what you did, I will also give twice of what you wish for to the person you hate the most, in other words, your boss." And so the man agreed and made his first wish. "I want lots of money," he said. Instantly, $22 million appeared in his banking account, and at the same time, $44 million appeared in his boss's account. Well, for his second wish, the man wished for a couple of sports cars. A Lamborghini, a Ferrari, and a Porsche immediately appeared, but at the same time, 2 cars of each make appeared outside his boss's house. And finally, the genie said, "This is your last wish. Choose very carefully." And so the man replied, "I've always wanted to donate a kidney." In other words, the man's boss would have to donate double that or 2, opposite results in the boss's death. Needless to say, the fruit of this man's wishes is questionable. The fruit of which Jesus is speaking has been a matter of some debate. And some have suggested that Jesus is speaking of the fruit of evangelism. That makes sense. We are to spread the gospel and encourage people toward a saving relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. And others, they have speculated the fruit we're to bear are the ethical virtues, like chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, patience, kindness, and humility, which characterize the Christian life. And certainly following Jesus means repenting of sinfulness and striving toward a moral life. Both evangelism and being virtuous have some merit, but are they the fruit of which Jesus speaks? Perhaps instead these are branches that have borne some fruit, but must be pruned in order to bear even more fruit. If this is so, what then is the more fruit, which Jesus is looking for from us? This past week, I found myself considering 2 possible ways of increasing ministries we already have here at St. Elizabeth's. Some of you may have seen this. On Monday of this past week, there was an article in the Savannah Morning News about the Richmond Hill Teen Center. This was new to me. And it occurred to me, for some reason, that I should go there and ask the director if she would be interested in us offering a Bible study there. And so I did that. Now, whether she will take me up on it is yet to be known. Interestingly, though, I learned that she has come to our thrift store to buy shoes for teens whose shoes were worn out. You know this girl, Jean. This was a fruit of the thrift store's ministry, of which I was unaware. Another possible example of increasing a ministry to bear more fruit in an area where we're already doing ministry that occurred to me was, this may sound strange to you, but setting up a prayer booth in a high-traffic area, like Publix, for example. The booth could be identified with something like, "Stop here for prayer." We could man the booth somewhere around that parking lot a few days a week when the most number of people might be shopping. Increasing both these ministries could very well increase our membership at St. Elizabeth's. Are these examples of the more fruit Jesus wants us to bear? According to the Reverend Dr. Rod Whitaker, who was a seminary professor for both Emily and me, he says if we were to read ahead through verse 17 in this same chapter of John, we would see that the fruit Jesus most desires us to exhibit is the possession of divine life itself. And the two chief characteristics of that divine life are knowledge of God and, as Nicholas said, love. And elsewhere in John, we can read where Jesus states that love is the evidence that one is Jesus' disciple, in union with God and in union with one's neighbor. And therefore, the image of the fruit represents that which is at the very heart of both Christian evangelism and ethics. Union with God through love of Him, our neighbor, and ourselves. So the idea that union with God through love as being the real fruit, Jesus expects us to show, to demonstrate, to be, is clearly emphasized in verses 4 through 7 of the same gospel reading this morning. Jesus tells his disciples to abide in me. 4 times he says that. And so having identified love as the fruit Jesus wants us to bear, how then are we to understand the pain of being pruned? What is its purpose? Prior to his baptism at age 39, Bob told his pastor, not that Bob, by the way, or that. Bob told his pastor, I was ashamed of myself. I had lived a sinful life and had been exposed to all sorts of danger. And once during a drug bust, Bob said, I was shot and almost killed. I had done so many foolish and stupid things. I had lost my wife and children, the only things that ever really mattered to me, he said. So finally, in desperation, I got down on my knees and I said, Lord, I made a mess of my life. I'm turning it over to you. And if you have purpose for me, use me as you will. And you know what, said Bob? He did. I'm now a counselor at a home for wayward boys, helping them to make something of their lives. Bob's example is in the extreme for most of us. His life, however, does point to that obstacle within ourselves that prevents us from bearing the fruit of love we should as followers of Jesus. The fruit of love for God, neighbor, and ourselves. What then stands in the way of that love growing and showing? Well, yes, it is ourselves. Specifically our pride and our ego. Consider how much pride Bob had to swallow when his life fell apart. And that does not mean we're going around thinking that we're better than others, though it might. Rather, the pride we're speaking of is that which limits our ability to love. It is that to which we hold on to for the sake of our self-worth. And so what are those things which give us a sense of worth, of self-worth, or prop up our ego? What are those things? Well, there could be any number of things. Some of us take pride in our jobs. If we were to lose our job, our self-esteem would plummet, would it not? And some of us take pride, get a sense of self-worth from our appearance. More than appearance because of an accident or some shortcoming in our clothing, maybe a wardrobe malfunction, then our self-esteem will suffer. We glean self-worth from all manner of things. Hobbies, what we know, relationships, golf games, playing cards, or playing some musical instrument. We can even base our self-worth on a ministry in which we participate and diminish any of these for whatever the reason: lack of practice, unfavorable circumstances, age, or competing with someone who is better. And our self-esteem, our ego suffers, does it not? These are the circumstances which prune us. If we're honest with ourselves at those times, we will realize that we have narrowly defined that which makes us feel good about ourselves. That our terms for feeling self-worth are conditional and not unconditional with love. Think of Jesus' washing of the disciples' feet. It took real humility, a lack of pride, a lack of ego for him to do that. Without that humility, his capacity for loving them would have been less. And similarly, without humility, our capacity for loving God, ourselves, and others is diminished. Without humility, we may find ourselves unwilling to minister, to bear fruit where God would have us bear fruit. Let me give you an example. You may not like this. What would make us reluctant to hand out flyers inviting people to worship with us at St. Elizabeth's and say the Publix parking lot? Assuming Publix allowance, assuming there are no security concerns, what would prevent us from handing out flyers? Similarly, what prevents us from inviting friends or family to worship with us at St. Elizabeth's? Isn't it our pride for the most part that stands in the way? In other words, might we feel ashamed or embarrassed to do that? And such feelings tarnish our pride, don't they? I would suggest then that the painful misfortunes in our life are what God can use to prune our pride. Call it self-esteem if you like, which is not to say we should have low self-esteem. To prune the pride we carry into our relationships, into our relationship with God, others, and ourselves. We don't necessarily willfully bring pride into those relationships. Pride is part of who we are. Yet something in us which needs to increasingly be diminished. A man writing at the post office desk was approached by an older fellow with a postcard in his hand. And the older guy said, "Sir, would you please address this postcard for me?" The man gladly did so, agreeing also to write a short message and sign the card for the man. And so finally the younger man said to the older man, "Now, is there anything else I can do for you?" And the older fellow thought about it for a moment and said, "Yes, at the end, could you please put P.S., please excuse the sloppy handwriting." No, it's no fun to be pruned, especially when we believe we have done something fruitful and worthwhile as a young man thought he had done for the older guy. Jesus tells us that bearing fruit is a matter of abiding in Him, and it is by being pruned that we abide in Him even more. Remembering the Steve Jobs analogy, Jesus is likewise internalized in us when we are pruned. It is in Jesus that we discover the fruit of peace, love, and joy regardless of our circumstances. And this is a fruit that benefits everyone. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.